Hi everybody, Dan Bailey here with some more camera tips for you. Today we're going to talk about action photography, and I'm going to give you a quick primer on how to approach shooting action so that you can get the best success rate with your camera. Now keep in mind, these tips apply whether you're shooting mountain biking, snowboarding, flying birds, also known as FBs, fleeing wildebeest, your kid about to score the winning goals, your hyperactive grandchildren, or your brand new puppy. After all, action is action, and you use the same kind of techniques no matter what kind of subject happens to be moving right in front of you. Although you don't need a super high-end camera to make jaw-dropping action photos, in this genre of photography, the gear does make a difference. Higher-end cameras have faster frame rates you can use, faster autofocus motors, more advanced predictive algorithms for tracking moving subjects. In addition, faster lenses let in more light, which means you can keep your shutter speeds higher, and this is especially important when the light gets dim. That means you don't have to crank your ISO dial up quite as much. However, that doesn't mean you have to have really fancy gear in order to shoot action photos. It's certainly possible to get great action photos from consumer-grade equipment that's not super high-end and not very expensive. Either way, here are 4 steps that you will need to do in order to set up your camera for shooting fast action. These steps are universal, but since every camera has slightly different controls and a different layout, you might need to refer to your manual in order to figure out how to set these particular parameters. And once you figure them out, you'll need to practice these steps on a regular basis. And when I say practice, I want you to get good enough so that you can do all these steps in about 3 seconds with your eyes closed. Because that's what it's going to feel like when the light gets good and the action starts unfolding and the dirt starts flying around all around you. You want to get to the point where this is all second nature. You don't even want to think about it. You just want to be able to gauge your scene and then get there just like that. Step number 1. Set your camera's autofocus selector to AFC. On many cameras, but not all of them, you'll find the AF selector switch somewhere on the front of the body. And you usually have 3 choices: S, C, and M for single, continuous, and manual focus. You want C, which puts the camera into continuous servo autofocus, and that's the setting that allows the camera to track moving subjects. If you don't want to sound too nerdy, you can just call it continuous autofocus, or AFC. And it doesn't matter if you use back button focus techniques or if you like to do it the regular way, you'll still need to have the camera on AFC. In this mode, the camera uses predictive algorithms in order to determine where the subject will be. Let's say there's a bear running towards you and you put your camera on AFC mode. The camera is going to analyze the movement style of the subject and then make determinations about where it's going to be. And it needs to do this because there's an inherent lag time from when the camera says the subject's in focus and you actually press the shutter and close the circuit. So those predictive algorithms make up for this lag time, and once the camera figures all this out, it then needs to communicate this information to the lens so the lens motor can start going back and forth and moving in the correct way in order to keep the subject in focus. It's an incredibly complex system that's going on inside the camera. Fortunately, we don't have to make those calculations ourselves. So it doesn't really matter what you're shooting. If your subject's moving, you're trying to track that moving subject through the frame, the camera needs to be set to AFC. Step number 2, set your drive control to continuous high. This lets you use higher frame rates, which are essential for capturing fast action and nailing the moment. Oftentimes, the best way to capture that moment is to shoot a quick burst of photos when the subject is racing by. If your subject is moving that quickly, you won't be able to recognize that moment in real time. So shooting with a frame rate of like 6, 8, or 10 frames a second, or maybe even faster, is going to allow you to shoot an entire series, and hopefully one of those frames is going to be the key moment that epitomizes the height of the action of your scene. And you probably won't even know that you've nailed it until you look at your photos later. Some cameras, including most of the Fujifilm X-series cameras, have a dedicated drive dial, but with a lot of cameras, you'll set the actual frame rates inside one of your menus. So you'll want to learn where this setting is so you can very quickly switch your camera to just shooting continuous high frame rate. Step number 3, set your autofocus mode or pattern to zone or tracking. So once you've set the camera to track with the AFC setting, you'll need to switch to an autofocus mode that enables tracking as well. Now, every camera has a slightly different autofocus system, and they have different names, so you might have to look at your manual to figure this out. The Fuji cameras have zone and wide tracking, both of which will track moving subjects, but every camera is going to have some kind of wide or large area zone that's suitable for tracking moving subjects. So again, you may have to refer to your manual to see which type of pattern or mode will be suitable for tracking the type of subjects you want to shoot. So with my Fujifilm cameras, I use Zone AF for tracking moving subjects. I prefer this over the wide tracking setting because Zone gives me greater control over the size and placement of my zone within the frame. And that corresponds to where the subject is placed in the frame. And with wide tracking, you have the entire frame and you're letting the camera choose. So in some situations, wide tracking might be preferable. It might be a little easier as well. With the Nikon cameras, you have Dynamic Area AF, which is very similar to the Fuji's Zone AF system. With either one, you'll set the autofocus box or zone in the part of the frame where you think the action is going to start. And once it acquires that subject, it'll be able to continuously track it as it moves across the frame. Auto area on the Nikon is very much like the Fuji's wide tracking. It's kind of autofocus. If you're not sure where the subject will enter the frame or where the action will begin, then this might be a good choice, as would be wide tracking on the Fujis. The Nikons also have 3D tracking. The 3D tracking setting on the Nikons is very much like the Fuji's Zone. It gives you a large box so you can actually change your composition and still keep the subject in focus. If you're a Canon shooter, I recommend either Zone AF or Large Zone AF. And you should experiment with those modes to see which one works best in certain situations. Some higher-end cameras have an AFC custom settings menu. This allows you to further customize and optimize the camera's autofocus system and change the way that it tracks and acquires moving subjects through the frame. Number 4, set your desired shutter speed. Once you have your autofocus system dialed in and you have your camera set to continuous autofocus, now you need to choose a shutter speed that's suitable for capturing the type of action you're shooting. Of course, your desired shutter speed is going to be based on a number of different factors, including how fast your subject is moving, the speed of your lens, the focal length of your lens, the specific creative ideas you're trying to convey, and the overall look you're going for in your photo. And depending on what shutter speed you use and how much available light you have, you might also need to make an aperture adjustment as well. In many cases, if you use a slow shutter speed, you'll need to stop the lens all the way down, and if you use an extremely fast shutter speed, you'll want to open the lens up. With this in mind, step 4 might be a multi-tiered step, in which case you might want to make this your first step. Of course, you can make things a little easy on yourself by using one of the auto exposure modes, like aperture or shutter priority. But either way, if you already have an idea of your limitations and the kind of look you're going for, then you might want to get this stuff out of the way and do this as step number 1. For example, maybe you're walking to your location and you're thinking about the kind of photos you want to take. In that time, you can make decisions and set your camera's shutter speed according to those ideas that you have. Then when you get on the scene, that's already set. And then you only have 3 steps to go. This is where a little bit of anticipation and forethought can actually make you a much more proficient and efficient photographer. Let's quickly run through the checklist one more time. Number 1, set your camera to AFC so you can set it up for tracking moving subjects. Number 2, set your camera to continuous high so that you can use higher frame rates to capture an entire series. Number 3, set your autofocus mode or pattern up for tracking. And number 4, set your shutter speed accordingly. Now you can do those in any order. That's the order that I prefer to use, but your own proficiency is going to depend on your own workflow and your own methods with the camera. Okay, now that you've set your camera up, you're ready to roll. You're ready to get some great action photos. After you've gauged the scene and analyzed the light, after you've decided what lens you're going to use, what vantage points, how you're going to shoot the scene, what creative ideas you're going to employ, after you anticipate the potential movement of your subject through the frame and search for the best background. Okay, I didn't mean to overwhelm you there, but there's a lot that goes into this process of shooting action photos. So that's why you want to get those 4 steps out of the way, why you want to go through that initial checklist and set the camera up. Because once you have the camera set, there's still a whole lot of things to be considered before you nail a great shot. And that's where it just takes tons of practice to get good at this. No matter what, the key to becoming a good action photographer is to practice, and practice a lot. I've been doing this for over 30 years. Shooting on a regular basis is going to make you more familiar with your gear and more familiar with all of those techniques that you might use in any given moment. Technical ability and proficiency comes from repetition. So get out there and photograph action as often as you can. That's what's going to make you better at this. And practice during times when you're not in the moment, even if you're just fooling around and trying to get photos of your kids or your golden retriever puppy. See how fast you can get through all those steps and get your camera ready to shoot action. Anytime you have a free minute, it doesn't have to take very long. You can pick your camera up and run through my action photography workflow checklist until it becomes second nature. Well, thanks for watching this tutorial. I hope you found it helpful. Please subscribe to my channel and check out some of my other videos as well, and feel free to leave me a comment. Look for me on social media and Patreon at Dan Bailey Photo, and check out my blog and website as well. If you want more tips and techniques for shooting action, you can check out my Behind the Action ebook, where I walk you through the process and the exact steps I took in order to shoot 12 specific action photos. And if you use this discount code, you'll even save 20% on the ebook. You can also check out my print book, Outdoor Action and Adventure Photography, which details everything I know about shooting adventure and action and moving subjects. So best of luck shooting action, have fun out there, and I'll see you next time.